Walk past any active construction site, and you will see it before the concrete arrives. A cage of steel bars tied into a three-dimensional grid, filling the space where a column will stand or running along the base of what will become a beam. Then the concrete is poured, and within hours, that cage is completely buried. It disappears. By the time the structure is finished, the steel is invisible. You can walk across a bridge or lean against a wall and have no idea that hundreds of meters of steel bar are locked inside, doing something the concrete cannot do alone. That something is the reason modern concrete structures can exist at all. The answer starts with a weakness in concrete that most people have never thought about. Let's get into it right here on Small Things. The one thing concrete cannot do. Concrete handles compression extraordinarily well. Stack weight on top of it and it pushes back. Columns in a skyscraper carry thousands of tons of downward force through concrete without issue. Under compression, concrete is one of the toughest materials human beings have ever built with. Pull it in the opposite direction and the picture changes completely. Stretch it, bend it, or apply any force that puts it under tension, and concrete cracks. The tensile strength of concrete is roughly 10 times lower than its compressive strength. A material that can bear a skyscraper's weight can be cracked by forces that would barely stress a decent rope. This is not a defect. It is the fundamental nature of the material, and it is the problem that every reinforced concrete structure exists to solve. A gardener's observation that changed construction. For most of history, builders used concrete for things that stayed in compression: walls, columns, arches, foundations. They avoided asking it to do anything else, because they knew from experience what happened when they did. The breakthrough came not from an engineer, but from a French gardener named Joseph Monnier. In the 1860s, Monnier was making concrete garden pots and tubs, and he kept running into the same problem. The pots cracked. Concrete could hold its shape under the weight of soil, but as the roots of plants grew and pushed outward, the force pulling the concrete apart would cause it to split. Monnier tried embedding an iron mesh inside the concrete walls of his pots. The mesh held the concrete together from within, carrying the outward tensile forces that the concrete could not handle on its own. The pots stopped cracking. The insight was deceptively simple. If you put a material that is strong in tension inside a material that is strong in compression, the combination can handle forces that neither could manage alone. Monnier patented his reinforced concrete method in 1867 and began applying it to larger structures, including water tanks and bridges. Engineers who studied his work recognized something important. The reason iron and later steel worked so well alongside concrete was not just that steel was stronger, it was that the two materials had a specific and fortuitous compatibility. They bonded well at their interface. They were cheap enough to use at scale, and they had nearly identical rates of thermal expansion, meaning when temperatures rose or fell, both materials expanded and contracted at almost the same rate. A material embedded inside another that expands at a different rate would eventually tear the host apart from within, summer by summer, winter by winter. Steel and concrete, almost uniquely, do not do this. Their expansion rates are close enough that the full range of temperatures a bridge experiences across decades of service generates almost no differential stress between the two materials. The bond at the interface holds because neither material is fighting the other's response to temperature. By the early 20th century, reinforced concrete had become the dominant structural material of the modern world. Every major bridge, every multi-story building, Every highway overpass built since has depended on the partnership Monnier stumbled upon while trying to keep his garden pots from cracking. Why steel goes where it does. Understanding why concrete needs steel is one thing. Understanding where the steel goes and why reveals something more specific about how forces actually move through a structure. Take a simple beam resting on two supports, the kind that carries a floor in a building or the deck of a small bridge. When weight is applied to the middle of that beam, it bends. The top of the beam is squeezed into compression. The bottom of the beam is pulled into tension. The top half is doing exactly what concrete does well. The bottom half is being asked to do exactly what concrete cannot. Without steel in the lower portion of that beam, the concrete at the bottom would crack under any significant load. The crack would start small, grow upward through the cross-section, and eventually the beam would fail. With steel bars running along the bottom of the beam, the tension is transferred to the steel the moment concrete begins to crack. The steel carries it. The crack stops. The structure holds. The ribs on the surface of rebar are the detail that makes this partnership work. A smooth steel bar inside concrete would eventually pull free under tension, sliding through the concrete like a rod through a sleeve. The ribs, raised ridges that run around the bar at intervals, bite into the surrounding concrete. Under tension, the ribs press against the concrete on one side, locking the bar in place. The steel and concrete deform together rather than sliding against each other. The sequence of events when a reinforced beam is loaded makes the partnership visible. As the load increases, tiny cracks form in the concrete at the bottom. This is expected. The moment they form, the tensile force transfers to the steel bar. The steel takes over exactly where the concrete gave up. The crack arrests. The structure continues to carry load. Without the steel, that crack would grow through the full cross-section and the beam would fail. With it, a small crack becomes an invisible event the structure absorbs without consequence. Rebar is not distributed randomly. Most people looking at a cage of rebar assume the steel is being added generally, distributed through the structure to make the whole thing stronger in a vague, overall sense. That assumption is wrong, and acting on it in construction would produce a structure far weaker than its dimensions suggest. Every bar in that cage has a position derived from a structural calculation. The engineer has modeled the loads the structure will carry across its lifetime, determined the magnitude and direction of every tensile force that will develop under those loads, and specified exactly where steel must be placed to intercept those forces. The cage is not built by instinct or by spreading steel evenly. It is built to a drawing that shows bar diameter, spacing, and depth within the cross-section, each value chosen for a specific reason. Placing steel in the wrong location does not simply fail to help. A bar placed where only compression exists contributes nothing to tensile capacity. Worse, steel placed incorrectly can interrupt the natural load path through the concrete, creating stress concentrations where none would otherwise exist. The structure can end up weaker than it would have been without the rebar at all. Quality control at the construction site includes checking that the rebar cage matches the engineer's drawings before concrete is poured, because once the concrete sets, there is no way to inspect what is inside and no way to correct a mistake without demolishing the structure and starting again. From molten steel to a hidden skeleton, steel for rebar starts as either iron ore or, increasingly, recycled scrap melted in an electric arc furnace. Recycled steel now dominates because it requires far less energy than producing steel from raw ore. The molten steel is cast into large rectangular blocks called billets, then reheated to around 1,100 degrees Celsius until soft enough to be shaped without cracking. The billets pass through a series of rolling mills that progressively squeeze and lengthen the steel into a long bar. Each pass through the rollers reduces the cross-section and increases the length, and the bars that emerge are far longer than the billets that entered. The final rollers stamp the ribs directly into the surface while the bar is still hot. The ribs are not applied afterward. They are formed in the same pass as the final diameter, making them a continuous part of the bar rather than a surface feature that could wear away. After rolling, the bar passes through a water quench, a rapid cooling that hardens the outer layer while leaving the core more flexible. This combination gives modern rebar its ability to carry tension without snapping under sudden load. In environments where steel would corrode, such as coastal bridges or roads salted in winter, rebar is coated in epoxy or galvanized zinc. Rust expanding inside concrete cracks it from within, and the coating is the barrier that keeps salt and moisture away from the steel. The partnership under every road. The steel inside a finished concrete structure has been invisible since the day concrete was poured over it. It will stay invisible for the rest of the structure's life. What is not invisible is what it is doing. Every vehicle crossing a bridge, every floor under load, generates forces that the rebar is intercepting, precisely where the engineer calculated it would need to be. Concrete does not become powerful by standing alone. Its real strength comes from a hidden partnership with steel, calculated before construction began, invisible after the pour, and silently reliable for as long as the structure stands. The cage of bars at a construction site is the answer to a century's worth of forces, already worked out, waiting to be covered. If this changed the way you look at the next concrete structure you pass, let us know in the comments what you want us to explore next. We might make it our next episode. Thanks for watching. History often hides in the smallest details.